With the end of the route split, the Night Forces reconvene, each of the groups introducing their new members and opening back up the suborders menu for players to both train units they no longer need to deploy and collect resources for everyone that will allow more thorough upgrading of units and their pilots' abilities, as I detailed more thoroughly when I reviewed V. You guys have all watched the Super Robot Wars videos by this point, right? But before we can continue the main story, this is where another few DLC bonus missions pop up for play. The first being a tale of Banjo Haran and the Gundam Wing pilot's arrival on Alworth, as they all originate from the same world of Revolution, and at the time when Marimea was conducting her coup. Their confrontation at the climax of Endless Waltz held off by everyone being ported here, Duo, Troa, and Katra ending up in a ruined city, along with the forces they were fighting, and a displacement across time depositing these three after everyone else was, Banjo finding them amidst this battle, but a week after he arrived as well, though already after the army had been recruited into the Mitsurugi Alliance, as the Grunts are all under the command of Bison, with them being saved by Hero, who is himself wary of Zogilla due to it causing abnormalities in the Zero system. Well, yes, Zero as a system is a precognitive system that determines the best course of action due to a mass intake of tactical data that gains more and more plausible predictions the longer the system is continuously run. Though that is also the misconception, that it can actually see the future. It can't. You can, in fact, trick the system by acting against expectations or predictions as it is not all-knowing, as seen when multiple drone mobile suits called mobile dolls were loaded with the system. It takes a human mind to interpret the data and choose a defined course of action. But that gets a bit more difficult when the causality trap problem of Buddy Complex comes in. As such, a paradox closes off probabilities, so a course of action has already been preordained. Thus, the possible options for courses of action shrink, so the system either can't work correctly, or the possible out the system can see to the situation has either already been preordained to occur, or they legitimately can't let or make happen, which can come across as an error. Because the system is literally a showcase of how freedom of choice determines our own destiny, it's in diametric opposition to the premise that our own fates are set in stone and choice is an illusion. This comes into play later, as the specific problem is appearing when it tries to analyze Bison, since, again, he's the one that has to travel back in time at some point in the future, thus locking his fate. Honestly, I don't get why this wasn't a main story stage due to this premise, as bonus missions in V were mainly left aside for additional moments of character interaction, and yet this one is actually introducing major plot points of the main story, as if they were acting as outright content-clarifying retcons, which again shows the issues of X's storyline just not being very good thanks to the series it had to include. The second is a different flashback to the Mike Gein antagonists going off under Purple's command to work with Dwokdar, and in doing so, kidnap Marie. Again, this is specifically Vuitton's plan, as the jewel thief that of course would be after the Blue Water Gemstone, Nadia willing to throw it away, and Nemo stopping her as he knows how dangerous doing that is. As is Nadia's recurring failure as a character, she refuses to listen to anyone else on why that would be an absolutely imbecilic thing to do. Especially with so many people that can allow them to safely save the girl without endangering her life being involved. Plus, you know, Maito's antagonists aren't exactly cold-hearted killers, for the most part. They're likely bluffing, which makes Nadia's bullheadedness all the worse, considering that group would be far more easily cowed by the actual killers in their midst into just handing over the blue water to anyone that might use it as the doomsday weapon that the thing actually is. Which is why it's so important it be protected, and why Nemo entrusted it to Nadia to begin with to protect it. Thus, Nadia's moral choice to trade in exchange to save Marie, as she sees it as a worthless gem in comparison to one person's life, would in turn enable genocide to the rest of the world.
Yes, you made the right decision.
No, that's impossible. How can that be the right decision? The scales are tipped the wrong way.
Again, I do not understand the appeal of this character. She is literally presented as being almost completely objectively wrong about everything. As even before that happens, Vuitton feels guilt over kidnapping Marie, after Marie tells Vuitton about her parents being dead, and Jean and company are the only family she has now. Which again shows that Marie was never in danger from this group, so Nani's actions are once again imbecilic. This entire stage, though, is just a vehicle for Grandis and Vuitton going at it, as she and her minions were originally thieves after the Blue Water themselves. So the stage devolves into a battle over the honor among thieves, which of course is going to vary from person to person. Meh, call Chris Pine and his merry band of misfits. Turn it into a dungeon raid where they fight a fat dragon and some undead. Getting back on track, however, Banjo calls the collective knights into a meeting to better explain the world of Revolution he, the Wing pilots, and the Aura Battlers come from, as it's for the most part following the plot of Wing. We're a worldwide paramilitary group kept order across the world until world nobles and their minions infiltrated and corrupted it thoroughly to tear it down and set the plan into a civil war between the varying factions of the Alliance, Oz, and the Gundam pilots, with the events of Daitarn 3 and Dunbine occurring in their own bubbles amidst this conflict. Where the snarl in the tale comes in, however, is the world of Revolution, is also where the events of Code Geass occur, and the Earthsphere Alliance of Wing originally coming about due to all the nations in opposition to Britannia's conquest and enslavement grouping themselves together as a unified power, just as Lelouch attempted to do with the United Federation of Nations in Code Geass R2. And that mostly works, at least from the perspective of that alliance collapsing and the story fusion having Lelouch be the one putting that alliance back together, and Wing covering one of many of the holes Code Geass's plot left in itself. For if one pays attention to the story of Gundam Wing, then you realize that the grand majority of it actually takes place centrally in Europe, Africa, and parts of Asia, matching with its European nobility stylistic motif emphasis on chivalry. Hell, there's a lot of French aesthetic in many of the uniforms of the Oz faction, and the material around Zex and his sister Relina, and them being part of a deposed royal family, echoing elements of the story of the Russian royal family, who disappeared in the 1900s after a revolt led by Vladimir Lenin deposed them from power. Rumors persisting for decades after, claiming they had survived, in part because impersonators of Russian Princess Anastasia attempted to repeatedly claim a right to the throne. And those who are curious about that, the entire family were found in a mass grave in an abandoned mine in 1991 and 2007, the advancements of DNA testing allowing all of them to have been confirmed killed when they were entombed there in 1918. Regardless, this is actually why Gundam Wing gels very well with Code Geass content, and not just because Code Geass drew inspirational basis from Wing to begin with. In the core Code Geass story, Europe and Africa were largely untouched material until the Akito OVAs, thus allowing them to occur mostly independently of each other if you set them in the same universe. Give or take things like the Damocles superweapon making less sense in a universe with space colonies. Hell, the Akito OVA actually helped the Wing parallel because the Romefeller Foundation that created the Oz faction and Wing is extremely similar to those that ruled the Europa United faction in Code Geass. So as far as the story fusion goes, trade one group for the other, and the plot still runs fine. This is very much why Wing and Code Geass worked so well in the Super Robot Wars Z sub-series of games. The two series helped cover the deficiencies of the other, and the inter-character conflicts that occurred within them came from logical places, such as Hero in those games not trusting Lelouch because of how much the man kept secret from others, and Lelouch not being able to put trust in such an independent death-seeking wildcard that Hero was during his own series events. X thus takes advantage of a lot of that material at this point, which is great for those that got a chance to play the Z sub-series. Not so much those playing X, however, as while it kind of alludes to the dynamics of Z, it falls into the trap that despite the interactions of these crossovers cast existing in the same world, all their events played out the same as if they were their canon stories. Meaning in that iteration, Banjo Haran was not able to interfere with the murder of Shirley Finette, so she still dies, which sends Lelouch into his death spiral, from which there was no return. This divergence from what Z did was all caused by Dunbine's faction, as Drake Luft was such an intrusive presence in the conflict, and him allying with Britannia under Emperor Charles, that it took Banjo's attention away from where he could have intervened in that. And after Drake was put down with the Aura Battlers disappearing, that, as told by this exposition dump, synced up with when Lelouch successfully killed his bastard of a sperm donor, which let Zex and Treize launch their own plan to end war, with Zex taking control of the White Fang faction to force people to become sick of all conflict, as I detailed earlier, which was in turn derailed by the Code Geass endgame, and Lelouch forced upon him by narrative contrivance Death Wish that made him declare himself the source of all evil in an attempt to subvert Schneisel taking command of Britannia, which would have resulted in the same thing anyways, as all these men agreed that conflicts in the world would only cease once people had enough common empathy to overcome their larger differences. And the fastest way to do that was to force them all to suffer from a computal threat or loss. And even here, that didn't work, because Lelouch's contingency plan against further conflict was Suzaku taking his mask and taking over the role as Zero, and as a result made Lelouch's entire sacrifice worthless, as his act of martyrdom still leaves an insider of conflict in power. For the only way Suzaku knows how to solve any problem is to oppress those who may have a legitimate grievance, and that starts the cycle all over again. This, however, I feel is deliberate and not a mistake on X's part, as the SRW staff members across the fucking board are blatant in voicing the fandom's loathing of R2's ending. The mistake I feel it does make in this is one of oversimplification. Neither Schneisel or Nunnally's actions with respect to the Damocles Fortress are at all mentioned in this plot recap, and it's Nunnally specifically acting to kill people with the Flesia super nukes that is the final straw to Lelouch committing to not just killing himself, but making the world hate him just as much as he'd come to hate himself, as doing so was the only way to make it seem as if Nunnally was not the would-be massacre empress, with how freely and easily she blindly, literally fired those warheads at whoever she was told to by Schneisel, their sociopathic elder brother, making her shoulder all the blame for the act and framing her for it, while she naively believed that all the hate would go towards the weapon and not the one who fired it. After she had done that, then the only way for her to not be seen as just as much of a monster as the rest of her family was for Big Brother to fix it, by making it appear he was worse in comparison, so she would learn the actual, true cost of her plan, and pay the consequences of it by spending the rest of her existence having to let the brother she loved be slandered as the most evil man that had ever lived. As before the Damocles happened, the plan Lelouch was running with was to tear down all the systematic corruption of Britannia, and then pretend to be a power-hungry tyrant so the common man would no longer tolerate them, essentially destroying for all time the concept of monarchies and making the people vigilant against any one person having too much power by making them be invested in politics and not just ambivalent to what goes on around them, because rulers only have power if you let them have it. And then that got thrown out the window when his sister willingly nuked the capital of Britannia. There was no going back after that point. Zex even alludes to this in response to Show's own hesitance towards the man. The White Fang plot Zex was the head of, having started before Show died in all this. So it's left to percolate in the back of their heads as another Dwokdar general attacks them, crashing their ships to the ground. Said general is Death God, who wields the Mirror of Truth, which when the mirror is clouded can invert a proposed concept. Ships that fly instead sink, buildings get flipped upside down, stuff of that nature. Fortunately, Death God, and yes, that is seriously his name, didn't have a chance to use it on the mechs, so the Twilight Knights can more freely assault his men, which go over without much issue, as ironically this god of death is the complete pushover, fleeing quickly as he claims he'll become unstoppable once he uses the mirror to revive a true Dark Lord. Hoikolo's group prevents the Knights from following, permitting the appearance of our redheaded best girl Kallen Kozuki. Though already this game is taking things out of character, as with her is Suzaku, who she claims is not an enemy. Yes, he is. That was his literal narrative role in that story. So everyone bending over backwards to pretend that it wasn't, despite it being the only way the story can pretend to work, is not doing anyone any favors. Made worse is right after they appear, so do Jeremiah Gottwald and the former Knight of the Round member Anya Alstrheim, both of whom have better justification to be allied with Kallen than Suzaku does. Yet they are explicitly acting against her. I explicitly did not get into Anya's stuff in the massive Code Geass review for just this reason. Anya's backstory has her repeatedly be the victim of a royal family member's Geass, entire periods of time going absent from her recollection, to the point she would keep a phone on her at all times, so she'd have a means by which to record what would happen in those gaps. Jeremiah freed her from that, and restored her memories thanks to his Geass counselor, so while she wasn't quite an ally in the climax, she did owe him. As for Jeremiah himself acting against Kallen and working for Dwokdar, well, there's only one man Jeremiah has loyalty to, and that's Lelouch. So from an audience perspective, we know his actions have something to do with Lelouch, someone Kallen would canonically wish to never let harm come to again. Thus they don't have any reason to fight, unless Dwokdar itself is somehow holding Lelouch hostage. Which is where the problem with Kallen and Suzaku's alliance comes in, as they've been dogging Death God for some time, as they believe he has Lelouch's corpse, which Suzaku wants to destroy, claiming it was Lelouch's last wish to prevent him from possibly being revived from the dead. Of course, if Lelouch actually got a code by which to be revived from the dead and made immortal, the entire reason Lelouch would have made that request, yeah, that don't work. CC was cremated before and came back from that without a scratch. So if Lelouch got an immortal body and hadn't woken up yet, what was Suzaku going to do? Cut him up, drop the dismembered body parts in cement blocks, and scatter them across the planet as a form of eternal suffering from him? Because I severely doubt anyone that actually loved Lelouch would have actually let him do that. Speaking of, yes, that is an actual proposed way to deal with code bearers in Code Geass that doesn't involve transferring their code from one Geass user to another. No reason we know of why they can't work. Hell, chain them up with some cement sneakers and drop them into the Marianas Trench. If done correctly, the water pressure constantly crushing their body and lack of light would trap them down there better than any prison could. So yeah, Suzaku's after Lelouch as he wants Lelouch to stay dead and will kill him as many times as it requires for that to happen. While Kallen doesn't want Lelouch's memory being tainted any further by impossibly being revived as an actual monster, which should put them at cross purposes as they have no confirmation that he is actually dead anymore. And there should be no way in hell that Kallen will let Suzaku anywhere near him after the shit Suzaku pulled. The best I can guess at why they allied, beyond Suzaku being Bandai's creator's pet by proxy thanks to how much they pushed the Lancelot, was due to neither of them wanting Lelouch to fight again. Suzaku because he believes Lelouch creates only chaos into the systems that govern everything, through which Suzaku makes himself the man in the right, and Kallen due to the harm she's seen him suffer again and again for others' sakes, since she's one of the few in the series that saw the true him to understand that pain. But there is a reason specifically Death God attacked this town, for this is where a not-dead Lelouch V. Britannia has been living since he found himself in this world. Banjo Haran finding him watching them all from a distance, with Lelouch offering to let himself die once again if it will save someone he cares for any more pain. Banjo ultimately doesn't do it, ultimately leading to Lelouch meeting Watchru and Amari the following day, as he looks around the mountain areas in the region. And we see how much Lelouch did not want to survive, telling himself he still doesn't have a right to live, so is just willing to waste away as a nameless nothing again. It's ironically him seeing himself in Watchru, seeing in the young boy that same drive to fix things in this world, that gets him thinking. But he's too scared of himself to intercede. However, when the Death God attacks once more, he's drawn into this again regardless, which is exactly what Anya and Jeremiah did not want. Both of them trying to lead Dwokdar away from Lelouch due to the crippled mental state Lelouch has become trapped in. Just too broken by his guilt over everything to be of use to anyone. Which is where the Mirror of Truth comes in, as Death God believes when used on Lelouch, It will unleash all the malice of his truest self. Unfortunately, a Mirror of Truth is the worst possible thing you could use on Lelouch. For the one thing, the single, solitary thing that Lelouch is more than anything else, is a liar. He is a man that deliberately turned every single thing about himself into a lie for other people. For those that he loved. And you just forced him to tell the truth. What follows is arguably the single best scene in any of the translated Super Robot Wars games to date, as the mirror's power instantly breaks Lelouch's guilt complex, all constructed from the lie that he was to blame for everything that went wrong. Every imagined evil in the world that made him martyr himself is instantly banished, leaving behind the absolute unyielding truth of who he is. As it at last dawns on everyone beyond Kallen what the truth actually was behind the actions of the man who is nothing. From the start, the truest self of who he was is neither Lamperouge or V. Britannia. It always, from the start, was the antics of a masked man and the ideals he embodied. That was the realization of who he most wanted to be. And this scene, this exchange between Kallen and Lelouch specifically, this is what I wanted from Resurrection. This is all I and many others wanted from that awful movie that it entirely refused to give us. And SRWX does it as an afterthought in the grand scheme of just facing one of Watcher's enemies, with Lelouch instantly directing them with his use of territory control to demolish Death God's forces, leading to the Mirror of Truth being stolen back and the curse it was used to place reversed. The entire cast resultantly commenting on how similar Ange and he are, as Lelouch directs them all in one massive blitz, with his reliable Q1 once more leading the charge alongside him.
What do you think?
It's not as good as the two having a proper team attack, but it works. And the following discussion after the battle gives more of what every Code Geass fan wanted from Lelouch and for Lelouch. For him to come clean about the truth of everything that he is, and find acceptance in their arms. Most centrally Kallen, who gives the most poignant conclusion to their leftover arc from the core series, with their proclamation that you are you. Kiss, damn it! This cycles back to my earlier criticism of X and forgetting to actually handle the presence of canonical paramours across the larger length of its tail. So the moments that Kallen and Lelouch get together are handled just as badly as Resurrection did. Resurrection has an explanation in that it was deliberately seeking to downplay and erase Kallen's status as the main love interest of the series as part of an executive mandate to replace her with CC, but as a crossover game made before Resurrection released, it has fewer excuses for it. It does, however, have a justification on why, even here, while they've settled things that divided them from this event, that doesn't change how this all ends, as they are going to be separated again. Because she can't stay with him, and he can't go with her. Even if Marimea's actions and Suzaku's incompetence already destroyed the peace he was trying to bring with the Zero Requiem on the world of Revolution, he already forever burned his public image. So if he were to return, he'd never have a chance to be with her, even if the story were to have him acknowledge and return Kallen's affections, as the second he was discovered, he'd be arrested, tried, and executed for the acts he pulled as the Demon Emperor, making it no different than had he died, only forcing Kallen to go through that again, and again be among the reasons why he was damned, which he won't put them both through. And in turn, Kallen can't stay in Alworth, as she still has her mom and friends that would notice and care. So to abandon all of that, even in the name of someone you loved, if they just return her their affections, that's not something Kallen would do, and not something Lelouch would want her to do, as it would then spit in the face of his sacrifice in the first place to bring a world where she could live happily. So as much as players of this game hoped they would do it, there are legitimate, valid reasons on a character and story level why they didn't. Which again, as much as I have been complaining about this game, it still treats this cast far better than the Resurrection movie did, as it didn't even try to reconcile this, and treated Kallen like shit in order to not reconcile it. Hell, as much as I've been continuing to bash the guy, even Suzaku is not entirely a hypocritical shithead here. My interpretation of what we've been showcased on these stages is just me putting Suzaku's words and actions into a reflection of their canonical context, which X tries its best to downplay once again, not just because the writers knew how much the character is despised, but because Bandai insists on promoting Suzaku's Lancelot as the premier machine of the series, and CC as having relevance. The SRW writers are constantly stuck with including them, despite showing that they want nothing to do with them. Hell, CC actually does appear on the stage out of nowhere. That's how much even here she is an afterthought. As I continued my thought experiment of it being possible to cut out nearly every scene of her involvement and have there be no major change in the story due to how little she affects anything that doesn't directly involve her. I can actually do that with Suzaku here too. He does nothing relevant in X. In fact, I actually don't ever let his character level up, not even once. So he becomes the lowest level unit in the game by its end, never leaving his introduced level of 17. But with the Code Geass drama done with, we re-enter a different Code Geass influenced drama, with the Cross-Ange cast plot coming in again, with word reaching Ange that her little sister Sylvia is being charged with treason and scheduled to be executed. Only with the additional screw-up towards this being Momoka, who is loyal to Ange more than anyone else, being the one that is even providing the contact to tell Ange about this, despite having to be aware this is a trap if she was still in the country, which is in turn a disservice to Momoka's character itself. And the plot of this basically plays itself straight from the canon incarnation and the prior reiteration of this event in V. Once again, if you've not already, please watch the V reviews where I go into that more in depth, because I will not be repeating that all here. Hell, X less effectively touches on that because it's made so much of the Cross-Ange content a complete afterthought in comparison to everything else. Which again, would have been more justified if they had started Cross-Ange's story segments in this game at this point in its timeline. Hell, this stage revealed that everything that was supposed to happen with Hilda that coincides with this event apparently already happened while Ange and Vivian were off helping Wataru. Except, Hilda deserting herself required assistance from Ange to happen in the first place, because Hilda lacked the means to do it herself. And worse, Ange helping Hilda? That's one of the triggers for what paramour stuff exists between them. So even that is now worse off, despite still stated to later exist. Except now it exists without cause, as that's what later leveraged their attraction. This isn't exactly me being nitpicky, but when you remove foundational elements of what a story builds without replacing the pillars that hold them up, then you're going to end up missing the essential structural components which allowed for a cohesive experience. What this stage has going for it, however, is instead the presence of Boy Ange himself, due to the parallels Ange's story plays to Lelouch's own, which thus leads to Lelouch supporting a full-on assault of the Mitsurugi Empire so Ange can try and save Sylvia, as that is everything he would do if he were in Ange's place. Again. But this once more highlights the contrast in execution between the two series. Sylvia is a malice-filled reinterpretation of Nunnally, viewed from the point of not just their common state of crippling, but how they view the world through a distorted lens created by the society they live in. Nunnally just more shielded and naive to it than Sylvia, due to Nunnally's respected blindness that more easily allowed her to be misled, as she never learned that there are those whom you cannot trust. Yet they're both convinced to commit atrocities with little to no influence needed. The major difference then becomes who is pulling the strings, as Ange and Sylvia's elder brother Giulio is not the Schneisel in this scenario. He is the Clovis, incompetently stumbling around and using others as scapegoats to insulate himself from just how generally bad he is at his job, which Sylvia is more than willing to go along with because it allows her to indulge in the dehumanization the land of mana inflicts upon those who cannot use mana, and against her sister in specific as consequence. I'll give X this, though. Because Giulio sticks around longer than in Cross-Age canon, we do get to see just how truly incompetent he is. Though that's more a consequence of the series' length than anything. For when his trap is sprung and Ange is left in the executioner's yard, he just spills everything about his plans, despite them not being complete yet. His gloating is not yet deserved, as while he thinks nothing can stop him, his forces are losing to us, and he's being confronted by Lelouch. You know, the Sunrise character whose family considers a man of Giulio's capability nothing but a pawn's puppet that will dance to their tune. As while Giulio kept all attention on them, they ignored all the explosives Lelouch had everyone scatter around the capital. As a country this corrupt deserves nothing but destruction. Before they can complete that task, however, forces from Neo Atlantis arrive to reinforce Mitsurugi's defensive line, as behind the scenes, Stupid Hair is also playing Gargoyle like a fiddle, as revealed in a confrontation Nemo has with the World Tuner, leading to the Knights having to break through the reinforcements to withdraw. Tusk showing up with his personal unit to help at this point, to finally introduce Ange's sole male paramour. But hey, much like in V, at least Ange has a place to properly belong that doesn't hate the very sight of her, as well as a new goal. For once they're done with the fighting, now that the Arsenal girls have all turned against the land of mana they were once enslaved to fight for, it means they can now look to find their own goals in life. At least once all that once held them down is itself all left broken. And that's something even the girls that still hate Ange can get behind, as can the rest of the Knights. Unfortunately, the raid the Knights performed on Mitsurugi, yeah, that's not just being ignored by their allies. Mask of the G-Reco antagonist seeing this as his way to get his faction to prove themselves, quickly organizing a counteroffensive before the Knights can return to the Land of Beasts. Mask making this battle a grand unveiling of their peerless new mass production units, the Jigen. Yeah, the Jigens were useless cannon fodder in UC-93. The fact they're brought out of the dark history mothballs is not exactly evidence that technology is more advanced in this era as is claimed by G-Reco canon. Like, even Mask's justification behind getting these new models is just plain pathetic, as if they had no leg to stand on beyond saying, "No you!" to everything. Even eventually bringing out their new super ultimate war machine, the Double Zeta Gundam. I mean, I don't hate the Double Zeta, but it's kind of badly designed in several respects. Case in point, the pilot they shoved in it can't even pilot it, them plainly incompetent, which allows Judao to steal his signature machine back with a little help from Bellry. Even as a third faction in receipts on this fight, these new machines being from up in space, as of course several space-based installations from the worlds would have been teleported here as well, but have managed to stay out of things until now. With this group ultimately being represented by the Giga Chad of UC Gundam himself, Char Aznavour, who everyone immediately treats as an enemy, to the point Mask actually acts as a temporary ally in this stage. And yeah, just like late Universal Century Gundam, by the time we get to his reasoning for attacking us, it doesn't explain at all why the game forces us into conflict with him beyond the tradition of forcing him to inexplicably act as an enemy. To be fair, Char has a bit of a defense here in that he would not be personally aware of the circumstances behind why the Twilight Knights and the Mitsurugi Alliance would be in conflict, just that machines and technology from his universe are being misused on another world. So the combinations the UC timeline characters have of him here, of Char bringing their conflict to this world, is just as applicable to them when you aren't aware of the reasons for why he is acting now. For as is revealed when you complete the stage, all Char and the Towasanga group he's working with were here for, it was just a fact-finding mission. Had the Double Zeta not gone nuts, had Mask Group not pressed the aggression, and had Seabook and the other UC members not attacked him first, then this situation wouldn't have escalated, and Char himself would not have been obstinate towards this group that has now been poisoned against him. We could have had him potentially be an ally, but no, we can't have nice things, now can we? Well, to be fair...
To be fair...
To be fair...
To be fair, Char, or the Char equivalent of the game, is usually treated as a late-game unlockable unit by doing enough on-map extra tasks to unlock them, just like we did in taking down full frontal nudity in V. It's just, some of the times the need to make a character an unlockable are flimsy at best, usually just avoiding the original death flags to prevent their bad ends. It's just, in this case, it's a matter of earning his trust to recruit him, instead of having his favor beforehand. As he leaves, however, we have even more problematic continuity for this game pop up, and it has to once more do with the world of Revolution. Earlier in this video, I described how Wing, Code Geass, and Dunbine's respective continuities synced up with each other according to this game itself, with Dunbine's events concluding first around the time Lelouch killed his dad, then Wings concluded with the space battleship Libra being destroyed, and then Lelouch took over Britannia, claimed he was behind everything, and Code Geass's Battle of Damocles over Japan occurred. They happen in that specific order. They are said in the text of the game, in a previous scene, to occur in that specific order. This next DLC mission contradicts that, as whoever wrote this DLC mission reversed the order of events, making it so Lelouch claiming the throne of Britannia happens first, to then engineer the scenario so Drake Luff's forces are allied with his Britannia, and not Charles. And if that was what was meant earlier in the game, then this makes no sense and compounds the error. Lelouch is willing to play himself up as the villain, but he would not have enabled actual malice like he is said to here. No, he'd be against that shit. Turn the armies he just took over from Britannia on the Ore Battlers, and raze Drake Luff to the ground with them first and foremost. Just as a reminder, Britannia in the Code Geass universe is the America equivalent, and America in Dunbine was firmly against Luff. So if they want to adapt that aspect of the story, there's no better way than to showcase that. Moreover, in the event Drake would have been a radical loose end to Lelouch's own plans, it is one he wouldn't have ignored. It's done to showcase Todd working with Suzaku and Jeremiah against Kallen, Sho, Marvel, Hero, and Anya, and to its benefit it actually has Suzaku as the end boss of the stage, so we can get it acknowledged for just once that Suzaku was the villain that walked him to his death. It's just the entire thing is one mess of out-of-character nonsense, included to try and explain why in the merged world of Revolution, why Hero wouldn't be involved in trying to stop Lelouch and Suzaku, which would have already been explicable from how damaged the Wing-related Gundams would have been from concluding their conflict. Moreover, this line, Kallen is saying to Jeremiah and Suzaku, when it should be one Kallen is saying to Lelouch. I know I already explained why this game couldn't ship the two, but this is still verbatim a line everyone that is a Code Geass fan wanted Kallen to say to him, but she was never allowed to, and is being robbed of that opportunity to do so again. Oh, and speaking of bad lines...
Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you forever. Fuck yourselves. Go fuck yourselves, you fucks.
I am overusing the Merlin Fish clip, but that is how I feel about Suzaku proclaiming anything at this point. It is a line that only works in one context, and X doesn't ever put it in that context, as that context requires that proclamation come from Lelouch, and be followed with a different sort of admission entirely that necessitates Lelouch tell her that he doesn't want to use her as a weapon directed at his enemies, as he cares about her too much to do that, romantic connotation or no. Kallen would summarily punch him in the face for trying to coddle her, as she's a warrior, dammit. Her place in the fight is by the side of who she fights for, and not placed off the board. As even in this stage, Kallen is the only one trying to stop Lelouch in that damn flashback from damning himself, while Suzaku himself is still dragging Lelouch towards damnation. For the Lelouch's sword that Suzaku is the one pointed at Lelouch's back, not the one that defends him. Always has been. The second DLC mission at this point is a bit more fun, as CC is craving pizza, and Elworth is a world entirely without pizza. This planet must be destroyed. Now. Nuke the entire site from orbit, it's the only way to be sure. This comes up as some members of the Knights have begun to feel the stress of everything built up, and Kallen suggests to the group some food therapy, which doesn't really fit her character, to be honest, as she isn't seen implementing food therapy much to deal with some of her moods. Leading to CC suggesting pizza, with cast members never hearing of it, and even beyond that, they don't have the ingredients between the ships for it. This is the point where CC pulls out a Galaxy Brain battle plan out of the padding of her bra that she has placed there for just these specific circumstances. See? Works every time. In actuality, these circumstances coincide with a Mitsurugi royal family tradition to tour the Empire and witness the well-being of their nation, during which the royal family would be showered in small gifts, one of which is a local settlement close to where the Knights are, that they can actually raid, which just so happens to specialize in the production of cheese, tomatoes, and grain. And since the family is down to just two, well, to echo Ange, screw them! We're raiding the city for supplies. It's something of a local service, too, due to how incompetent Giulio is at his job, that he conveniences everyone local to wait on him hand and foot. Which is all the more ridiculous for him to be that lazy to need it when you remember... magic! God, Giulio outed his sister as the magicless Norma, and he is the one that deliberately chooses not to use it. Of course, Kallen would be the one to pop the acting bubble as the spiritual mom in this situation. Sadly, we've got to put up with Mask being their guard again. This stage exposing Mask's own inferiority complex he used to justify crushing people underneath himself due to the discrimination he himself has suffered, which is another frustrating Sunrise trope that doesn't work the way claimed due to how Sunrise executes such again and again. But then again, this is a Tamino character, with the assembled retorting against his actions that if Mask doesn't like how the world works, then instead of enabling the very malice that's oppressing you, you need to fight back against it and destroy the very system that caused it in the first place. Which Ange calls out as him being a loser because he'll only fall in line with the strong. Why is Lelouch not part of this mission? Some might consider a character redundancy to be here with Ange, but Kallen's here, and Ange is one part Lelouch and one part Kallen, selected by the Double X Factor and aged to perfection over 16 years. That oddly also applies to the production of cheese when one considers the respective cure times of really good cheese. But I'd want him and even Suzaku to be here specifically because of the relevance this Reason You Suck speech has specifically to them, which will allow the Code Geass cast to explicitly rag on Suzaku. Really, it's lines like these in this DLC mission and the hilarity of this all just escalating from the group wanting to get pizza ingredients that makes it one of the best in the game without exception. With Ange also getting back a bit more of her story by being able to make her former siblings flee for their lives from the sight of her mere presence in the Vilcus. With them retreating, the Knights get the supplies they needed, and Cece is allowed to feed her pizza addiction thanks to the combined efforts of Kallen and Ange. Let's face it, this DLC stage was just cheesy. Following that among the DLC is the Boss Rush stage Dream Battle, and honestly the Boss Rush stages in this game have far less reason to exist narratively than these did, With V, it was 9 tricking the cast into getting performative combat data. Whereas in X, it's just a lucid dream Sparrow creates for the cast to experience because it's expected to happen, but it's another thing that isn't really done with purpose. Getting back to the main story, however, now that we know that otherworlders are not just on Alworth, but in the space above it, we need to address that and see what might be up there. Danielle reporting to his superior Klim again to confirm that the group Shar was with were from the aforementioned Towasanga group. Klim deciding it might be a good idea to negotiate with them in person to head off any further hostilities, thus requiring the Knights head to space. Problem is, at this point in the game, not every mech here is space capable. But the plan because of that in the interim is to once again perform a route split. All of the Gundam characters and the Buddy Complex crew heading up to space, while Wataru, Nemo, the Brave Express Corps, Gurren Lagann, the Black Knights, and Arsenal remained on the ground. I decided to do the space route first this time, but we'll swing back to the ground team later on. Though before either route, Kuramitsu brings up how Amari and Sparrow haven't been on the best of terms as of late, due to Sparrow invading her privacy and poking holes in aspects of the story the Keepers fed her about them saving her. And the Zelgard's been suffering for it as that machine is an old mech, needing both of them at their best to make it move. Yet a lot of Sparrow's actions are motivated not by him caring about anyone, but to solely satisfy a lust for knowledge, having only intervened to help Anj earlier to see the dark side of the Mitsurugi. So there is a legitimate concern that all of Sparrow's actions are motivated for self-serving reasons, and not because the magic bird places any value upon others. An aspect needed to be cleared up for what progression we get with them to move forward. We get a cutscene here as well to most of our Mitsurugi allied antagonists, giving us a chance to properly introduce Dakeen Barton, the true antagonist of Endless Waltz that was manipulating Marimea Kushranada. Kampa from G-Recco, who was the dumbass thinking conflict without purpose is needed for humanity to not stagnate, and Wilhelm Hahn, head scientist of Zogilla in Buddy Complex that's behind a lot of the indoctrination in that series. This being done to properly introduce the three men to the man they've all sworn allegiance to, Embryo, who is now taking a more active hand in events that will shape the conflict in Alworth. Speaking of Alworth, we finally get a view of the planet we're on, and man, it's weirdly colored for a planet. The showcase landmass being wildly inconsistent from the world map we keep getting shown. Though the site of space recovers the memory of the previously amnesiac Raraya, her origins from space and the nature of the space nations of Regild prompting a discussion of the idiotic taboos of the Regild century, and how everyone in space, specifically a group known as the Hermes Foundation, has locked out industry in forms of technological advancement from anyone's hands to keep everyone stagnant, as at this point technologies do exist that are capable of resolving all of humanity's problems. It's just they have a stranglehold monopoly on all of them as they think unfettered access to technology is what causes endless wars and endless consumption. As discussed before, it's not, and the belief that it is part of Tomino's vast oversimplification and misrepresentation towards the various causes of war, at least as he presents in his series. I don't know what his personal views are on it in specific. Science and technology can fix many causes of conflict and the overconsumption of natural resources by providing alternative means to remedy them. You know how much science and human rights abuses the last century have been caused over just securing oil? Yeah, science has a solution for that. We can make everything that used to require fossil fuels now through other means, or the recycling of objects already produced. Why such isn't more implemented, however, is many corporations don't want to pay to upgrade from older, more wasteful methods as that requires them to put their money into it. And they don't want to give money to update their processes. They want to continue taking and hoarding it, as money for many is power. Thus they view it as cheaper to buy a politician to legislate things as an exercise of that power. And the problem with that is the politicians they pay to get that are often so morally bankrupt or power-hungry, they themselves either promote or enable dehumanizing rhetoric and encourage ignorance of the masses, which starts a feedback loop where those targeted for that dehumanization are victimized, inequality is caused, conflict between sides form, those ignorant of the causes make things worse, and if not remedied, that escalates, and then we all get stuck in stagnation as the resultant culture war distracts from and obfuscates the identities of the truly responsible parties behind why the root problems we suffer are not getting fixed. Toxic capitalism is the enemy. People put in power that do not care for the well-being of the people. Only their own power is the enemy. Stagnation of the people so they cannot grow is the enemy. As all these things deliberately cause inequality that divides people, so an elite group view themselves as better or more deserving can seize more power for themselves. And that breeds animosity that incites war. And that's again the problem with G-Reko's plot, as the villain of the story uses war for the sake of war as a means of solving societal stagnation, when that stagnation is being caused by systematic inequality they are not addressing, that is in turn being facilitated by the monopolistic corporatocracies run by the Spacers, descended from the same assholes that screwed up the setting to begin with, who just moved their place of residence and left those they abandoned on Earth that they tricked into doing their dirty work holding the bag full of blame, resulting in the Spacers' societal suppression of Earth in the common man's misguided belief that Earth incites all conflict, allowing those responsible to now maintain their control through the prevention of helpful technologies being further developed, or giving them anything that would disrupt their hold. That would actually make G-Reco really interesting for an inversion to the expected shtick of UC Gundam, if that was at any point the intention, instead of just being an afterthought observation. So this is all why, once again, G-Reco as a series was out of step with its own message, even in its movie continuity, as its central villain is symptomatic of a sociocultural problem G-Reco, like a lot of Tomino's works, had no interest in even acknowledging, let alone resolving. Unfortunately, as we meet Klim and their companion Mick, who are in Neo Zeon's Jagdoga mechs, we see another expression of how deep G-Reco misses the point, as Klim is a battle freak who thinks that his supremacy in battle will lead to Towasanga acknowledging his capabilities, as he's another one of those might makes right morons, when they would actually see such a threat to their control, and making dialogue with them even more difficult as Klim literally picks a fight with one of their patrols. Klim is depicted as possessing charisma, and no, he doesn't. If anything, he has anti-charisma. He drags the rest of this division into it, which escalates things even further as their units and reinforcements are all based on Neo Zeon units, as is informed by Raraya now that she has her memories back. For she is in fact a former ace of Towasanga, and the previous pilot of Bellry's G-Self, who tells them that Klim's actions have screwed up entirely into making this group hostile to begin with. Nor is Bellry himself helping matters, as instead of letting the ships try and hail these reinforcements to try and explain this as a misunderstanding, he equips the G-Self's assault pack And yes, Bellry, many people on those carrier ships likely died from that. And in doing so, you've made things worse. And he remains completely oblivious to this while blaming the ones responding to an attack on them by his own bosses. Like, I continue to generally be at a loss for words over this. I know this is a reflection of G-Reco's own issues, but I'm baffled why X's writers made no attempt to remedy this. And the retention of the things unchanged continues to be compounded by the isekai plot, as the central antagonist of this stage, the Towasanga ace Rockpie, then unnecessarily antagonizes Bellry in a way that makes it seem like Rockpie is the guilty party instead of Klim over this skirmish, with his factions focused upon the Reconquista. The Reconquista is actually supposed to be the Spanish word Reconquista, meaning reconquest or reconquer, which Tomino deliberately misspelled, and is inevitably the endgame of G-Reco, where those in space would en masse emigrate back to Earth once the planet is at a point where it can sustain a large human population again, and basically take over everything. This goal being part of the reason why Earth natives aren't permitted more advanced technology, so there'd be little resistance towards them declaring eminent domain. Again, and taking over. As I said earlier, it becomes a redo of F-91 and Victory's plots, with fewer justifications, since the spacer colonies in the Reguiled century were actually properly constructed, instead of the defective rush jobs F-91 and Victories were dealing with if they actually lasted 1,000 years. And if there were problems with them, yeah, they would need to have emigrated out of them far sooner. Spoilers, there is actually revealed to be problems with them, but they're ones that are so stupid to exist that they should all be dead already. The issue among the spacers is just that some want it to happen sooner, while others are content to let it happen when it is time for a more peaceful reunification. So even among the spacers, there's too many political factions in play to really keep track of them. The one Klim just attacked are part of the Doret faction, while another of them happens to be of the Ray Hunton royal family that is the one Belry and Ida are the heirs to, with Raraya and the G-Self sent to their Earth to find and recover them, as the G-Self has a gene lock on it that only allows those part of and approved by the family to pilot it, this being how the two find out that they are in fact siblings. Meanwhile, at the coming destination of the Serrano 5 colony, we find Char in discussion with Amuro and Tobia Aranax, trying to recruit them into furthering Towasanga's goals of a peaceful reunification, which he is doing so with intent to repent for his past misdeeds. And that being another thing that doesn't make sense in this game, but all Amuro can do is insult Char's dress sense. Hey, it's not the game's fault that that's the only outfit sprite they have available for him to use, while Tobia is too paralyzed by being in the presence of two legends to really give a proper answer. Which is where we're going to call it for now, as there's still a lot to go through with this plot line, and this is honestly the best place to break it at. We'll see you next time for the continuation.